tonight we are in chapter 10, so we're nearing the end of the book. And I'll be honest with you, chapter 10 is a little bit schizophrenic's not the word, maybe frenetic is the word. It's just I can imagine him like late at night sitting around the table, kind of just pulling his hair out and going, why on earth is the world this way? So it's much less observation driven, I think, than before. So before in his case studies, it was here's something I want to go out and look at, and now it is, and then here's my summary of that experiment and my observations, and now he's kind of just spouting stuff, and it has this very frustrated tone.
So do you think maybe he wrote it at different ages in his life, that it all wasn't written out at the same age?
Oh, I don't know. Um, to be honest, I don't know. My
Well,
my assumption about it is that he's writing this in old age, kind of reflecting on life.
yeah.
So um, I do think there's certainly an element of just a frustration in this particular chapter. He doesn't seem to be afraid to respond emotionally. You know, the picture we have of Solomon in Proverbs or in the other history books is he's very calm and rational. You know, there's the famous story where the two women come in, and you just imagine the frantic terror as they're arguing over whose baby this baby is. And this is obviously before there's a chance, a way to prove it, birth records and whatnots. And then his solution is equally terrifying: cut the baby in half. And so you have a mother, the real mother of the child, is willing to say, okay, just let the other woman have it, which is an emotional roller coaster to send someone on. And then he goes, okay, well, you're obviously the real mother. And in that moment, you read that story, he sounds just so calm. And then when you read Ecclesiastes, he talks about hating life and wanting to die, and all of these other things. And so I think you see a little bit more of his personality in the moment coming through. All right, let me share my screen. There we go. So this is chapter 10. Let's go ahead and read. He says, dead flies make the perfumer's ointment give off a stench. So a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. A wise man's heart inclines him to the right, but a fool's heart to the left. Even when the fool walks on the road, he lacks sense, and he says to everyone that he is a fool. If the anger of the ruler rises against you, do not leave your place, for calmness will lay great offenses to rest. There is an evil that I have seen under the sun, as it were an error proceeding from the ruler. Folly is set in many high places, and the rich sit in a low place. I have seen slaves on a horse, and princes walking on the ground like slaves. He who digs a pit will fall into it, and a serpent will bite him who breaks through a wall. He who quarries stones is hurt by them, and he who splits logs is endangered by them. If the iron is blunt, and one does not sharpen the edge, he must use more strength. But wisdom helps one to succeed. If the serpent bites before it is charmed, there is no advantage to the charmer. The words of the wise man's mouth win him favor, but the lips of a fool consume him. The beginning of the words of his mouth is foolishness, and the end of his talk is evil madness. A fool multiplies words, though no man knows what it is to be, and who can tell him what will be after him? The toil of a fool wearies him, and he does not know the way to the city. Woe to you, O land, when your king is a child, and your princes feast in the morning. Happy are you, O land, when your king is the son of nobility, and your princes feast at a proper time, for strength and not for drunkenness. For through sloth the roof sinks in, and through indolence the house leaks. Bread is made for laughter, and wine for gladness, and wine gladdens life, and money answers everything. Even in your thoughts, do not curse the king, nor in your bedroom curse the rich, for a bird of the air will carry your voice, or some winged creature will tell the matter. We'll stop there. This passage is a little bit tricky. You can see what I'm saying, where there seems to be a sense of frustration, and it's almost like he's kind of going a number of directions. I'd like to return to our tradition of using some small groups. And so I want to split the chapter pretty much in half. So verses 1 through 15 will be for group 1. Let me type this out. Group 1. 1 is 1 through 15. 2 is through the end. And I want you in your groups to discuss the elements of each of these things. So in set 1, we have a particular case study. This is kind of his errors and risks in daily labor. So that's what he's talking about. Is there's kind of this ironic, there's this irony that he's toying with as he's talking, almost as a sense of humor, not in a funny way, but more like a smacky kind of way. And then case study number 12, this starts at 16 and following. This is the folly of bad government. And so he has a lot of observations to make there. And so I want you just to discuss, for the first half, maybe talk about what is that sense of irony that he is toying with. And for the second one, what are the elements of bad government? I mean, what does he see as the quality that makes a government bad or makes governors bad? Okay, so let me start our breakout rooms. There we go. And here we go. Okay.
So Melody's study Bible was saying that that fools often don't understand fundamental things that could make their work easier, like how to get to the city and that sort of thing. And in previous verses, they talked about not sharpening axes, and so it leads to more work and that sort of thing. So that may be some of what's going on there.
Okay, well, let's look at the first section with group 1. What were some of those ironic twists that Solomon described?
So who was group 1? Was Melody in them group 1?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, okay. We thought we were group 1. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I guess I'll be group 2.
What are your answers? Yours may be better than ours.
No, we don't have good answers either. Well, I haven't heard your answers, but we did not understand any of it very much.
Okay.
Yeah. So were we just supposed to identify the irony or explain what the irony means?
Sure. What are you ready for?
I can identify it.
Oh, okay. Let's start with identifying.
Okay, some of it anyway. So the beginning part, the dead fly in the perfume makes it smell bad. And it says, so little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. So for that one, we talked about how, talking about like people who have lots of position and power and are very highly regarded can make like one small slip, and they're, disgraced from that, and how quickly they can fall from honor after making one slip. And then, some of the other irony is 6 and 7, folly is set in many high places and the rich sit in a low place. I've seen slaves on horses and princes walking on the ground like slaves. Right. Couldn't explain that one, but could be irony. And then 8 through 11 is all of these things that are, they're doing work, but maybe they're doing their work irresponsibly or doing their work foolishly, and it's causing them harm. Um, so yeah, I don't know.
All right. Well,
One of the,
so go ahead, Jeff.
I was just saying, one of the things we were considering is that you see through these verses how damaging foolishness is, but there's no guarantees. Even if you're successful and behaving wisely and all that, you can still end up getting injured at work or having bad stuff happen. There's,
Right.
behave wise, do it right, suffer the consequences anyways.
Yeah.
It's some of the irony there.
We still live in a fallen world. We're still under the consequences of sin. Because of that, everything that was supposed to be good and beautiful and not easy necessarily, but would work correctly according to its design, now doesn't. And so, yeah, let's look at some of these. So the first several, I don't know that we need to make too much of each individual example. If you remember, one of the sort of ideas that we draw from this book is that Solomon's notion of like the happy medium between work that we have to do as a necessary evil and enjoyment, which we like, but we also know that it's complete folly, as ultimately is the work, is one is to have the means and then to be able to enjoy the means that you have. So to have money and then to be able to enjoy the money. To be able to have the time to enjoy what money can bring, but not the money, is pretty much worthless. And vice versa. To have money, but without the means to enjoy it is worthless. And so here he's giving things that are, the first one is somewhat good, but it's really weird for it's really weird for perfume to give stench. Perfume is supposed to smell good. In the ancient world, perfume was often a substitute for bathing. In some cases, or not in some cases, in many cases, for those who could afford it, it was a rite of burial. If you remember, Jesus was his body was covered by the women in certain oils and ointments to help kill the smell. A few days before, or the day before his death, Mary Magdalene broke the box and covered his feet in ointment. So many people say that the ointment, as Judas suggested, was kind of fit for a king. So they would have, people who were in the crowd but couldn't see Jesus would smell the smell as he walked through the crowd. And the smell would reach them before they would see him, which is a bit of an assumption, but an interesting one nonetheless. So perfume is really great, but it takes the tiniest speck of a fly to get in, and all of a sudden it starts giving off a stench. So by extension, we can understand the second half of the verse. If wisdom and honor are good, it just takes that momentary speck of folly to mess up the entire thing. This is his equivalent of Benjamin Franklin's, for lack of the nail, the shoe was lost. For lack of a shoe, the horse was lost. For lack of a horse, the
Rider was lost.
rider battle. Yeah, we've all heard it. So this is kind of his equivalent of that. And he goes on further, the wise man's heart inclines to the right, the fool's to the left. Even when a fool walks on the road, so even when like the signs are just clearly marking which way to go, he lacks sense. He just walks down the road saying to everyone that he's a fool. And then this verse 4 actually kind of relates to something he says in Proverbs. He says, if the anger of the ruler rises against you, do not leave your place, for calmness will lay great offenses to rest. I think we often automatically respond emotionally to things. And this is not the first time for Solomon to say something like a soft answer turns away wrath, or other kind of things like this. So this fits in line with that. So he goes on from there, And now, oh, sorry. Well, he's continuing this in verse 5. He says, I've seen this evil under the sun. There's an error from a ruler. Folly is set in many high places, and the rich sit in a low place. I've seen slaves on horses and princes walking on the ground like slaves. We don't know if he's literally observing something, like he's looking at something while he's writing this, but he's at least describing something he's aware of, which is this sort of reversal of roles. This is hard for a lot of people in power to understand, reversal of roles, and for him it certainly is so. He's mentioned before, in a few chapters back, he's mentioned how the slave who sleeps well at night, what good is this, and what good is the rich man who doesn't sleep? One has the riches, the other has the sleep. In order to hit that happy medium for Solomon, you need to have both the riches and the sleep. And so to have one without the other, it's kind of this ironic foolishness. And so this is the same thing. You have a king sitting in the place of a slave sitting in the place of a king. It's just this situation that should never happen. And then he goes into a series of examples, which again express this irony. And I just see him, it's like he's thinking of these contradictions in life. Often when we go and we see new cultures, we very readily spot the contradictions. I mean, people come to the States and they say, look, on your money, it says, "In God we trust," and look how people spend their money. They spend it on all of these things that God is against, or they're not trusting God, they're trusting their money. And we do this, everywhere we go. It's very easy as the outsider to spot the inconsistencies. And that's what he's doing. He's spotting the inconsistencies. He's spotting the reversals. And so this is something fascinating when we get into New Testament times, because in many ways, the gospel is a kind of reversal in the sense that it is very leveling. So in the ancient world, they're very, I'm going to say, black and white. They're very concrete in how they see ethnicity, how they see gender, how they see riches, how they see poverty. If you're impoverished, well, you're a sinner. If you are rich, well, obviously the gods love you. If you're a man, you hold this place. If you're a woman, you don't. If you are Roman, you're up here. If you're all these other things, there's, it's just kind of a sliding scale of status to them. And then they're very, as Americans, our desire and our norm is equality, right? My chair shouldn't be higher than yours and yours shouldn't be higher than mine. We should all kind of sit about the same height at the table. But for them, they would say, no, let the rich guy sit higher. He should sit higher. Well, when we talk about that all people are equal in Christ, or modern folks have said the ground is level at the foot of the cross. Not geographically accurate, but whatever. It's on a mountain. But anyway, the theology behind it is this idea that there's not, in Christ, there's not Jew or Greek, slave or free, male or female, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's this kind of leveling quality, which to me as an American, I go, man, sign me up for that. That's my jam. Well, what if I was someone in the Roman world who had status, and Jesus comes and says, look, God loves everyone the same. Wait a minute, but I'm a rich Roman citizen, landlord, landholding kind of person. God loves me more, right? And he would say, no. God died for you. God died for your slave. Wait. I'm going to worship and be equal with my slave, and he's going to be equal with me. This sounds great to us because that's our norm, but in this time and place, this is not normal thinking. This is abnormal thinking. And Solomon, to a degree, is in this a little bit. And so he's observing these kind of weird reversals, like in verse 6. Folly is set in many high places, the rich sit in low places. I've seen slaves on horses and princes walking on the ground like slaves. And then he just goes through the series of contradictions. He who digs a pit will fall into it. Digging a pit is good if that's what you're supposed to do, but it's kind of bad if you fall into your own pit. A serpent will bite him who breaks through a wall. All of these are kind of ancient Middle Eastern proverbs. He who quarries stones is hurt by them. We have a modern day expression that might illustrate some of this when we talk about someone who does a particular job, but if you go to their house, that job is not done in their house. So we say, the cobbler's children are barefoot. It'd be like if someone, their job is to build fences and they make these beautiful, gorgeous fences in the really nice neighborhoods, and then you go to their house and their fence is falling down. And, it happens in ministry too. There's the joke about, cover your ears for a moment, Emily. There's the joke about PKs being really, really bad. And that's the irony. The pastor is supposed to teach us how to live and how to parent. And then very oftentimes, their children are terrible. I have great kids, so I'm happy there. And so it's kind of, again, one of those ironic things. You would expect your pastor to have a happy marriage and your pastor's children to be well behaved because of the nature of who a pastor is supposed to be. But quite often these things are, contradictory. Imagine a financial advisor who's deeply in debt and, someone forecloses on their house. It's just, these are ironies that shouldn't happen. And this is where I imagine like Solomon is just spouting these almost like a lunatic, and he's just raving about these gross tragedies as he would see them in the world. Verse 11, if a serpent bites before it's charmed, there's no advantage to the charmer. This one is super, super culturally embedded. Snake charming is a Middle Eastern to Far Eastern thing, and it's not something I think modern city dwellers really understand or are down with. I'm Cajun, and so all snakes kind of look like dead snakes, regardless of their kind. And we have a way of just making them so. But in the Middle East, they have these people who charm snakes, and it's almost like a dog whisperer or horse whisperer, where they're just seen as having this kind of, I don't know, mystical power to be able to control the snake and make it do things. But so to a snake charmer, that is an advantage, though it's one that we can't comprehend, perhaps. But he's saying if the snake bites the snake charmer, we're all in pretty bad shape. Yeah, no kidding. That's why we killed him. Verse 12, the words of a wise man's mouth win him favor, but the lips of a fool consume him. Solomon is very, very consistent in his dialogue about speech. He talks a lot about the power of words, power of responses, peaceful language, conflict. There's so much in Solomon's books, this one included, but particularly Proverbs, where he gives us a lot of really great advice on wisdom and words. And so earlier in the book, Solomon asks, if the wise man and the fool die together, to what advantage? Why am I so stinking wise? What advantage is it to me that I'm so wise? And well, this would be one where he says, here is one of the advantages. The wise man's mouth leads to foolishness. The wise man's mouth leads to favor, and the fool's is foolishness. In verse 14, he goes on, a fool multiplies words. A few chapters before, he had said, let your words be few. And in verse 14, he's actually getting into kind of the future or the projection that words make. So he says, a fool multiplies words, though no man knows what is to be and who can tell him what will be after him. I imagine a fool in this context maybe making a bet or a gamble about the future, or all of these predictions. One of the great things about learning new skills or trying to learn new skills is it teaches us humility. We see someone do something in the world or now on YouTube, and because we see a regular person doing it, we immediately, a very immediate response is, oh, I could do that. Until you try it, and then you realize, oh, wow, they did a really great job making that look super easy. And so this is the same thing. A foolish person just talks and talks and talks and talks, and he makes these projections. Sort of like little kids talk about their dad. My dad can beat up your dad. I remember thinking that my dad could beat up anybody. Why little boys think their dad has to hurt people violently, I don't know. This is just something boys do. And so like 7, 8, 9, my dad can beat up your dad. And now I'm looking back and I'm thinking, man, my dad's about my size, and that guy was about Michael Holmquist's size. And I realized, like, that guy would have killed my dad had that ever come to fruition. Me just foolishly running my mouth and projecting the future. No one knows what is to come. And so in our world, there's a whole, and especially in sports world, there's a lot of trash talk where people make all these projections and insults to the other team, and it's part of the whole experience, I suppose. But in a real life kind of way, Solomon's saying this is folly because no one knows what's to come in the future. Okay, so let's look at verse 16 and following. This is kind of the second case study. Well, let me stop there. Does anybody have any questions about those? Or is there any of those analogies that you wanted to look deeper into that I passed over? Okay. Let's go on to his second set then. This first one can be a little bit confusing. He says, woe to you, O land, when your king is a child. This word, is anybody in a different translation other than ESV? What does your translation say? You have to unmute.
Woe to you, land, when your king is a youth and your princes feast in the morning.
Yeah. So that word has two different meanings. One can be a child or youth, and the other can be a slave or serpent. Slave or serpent. Slave or servant. Sorry, I've got snakes on the brain. And so,
gumbo.
what's that making? No. Actually, one of the few animals I've not eaten. I've never tried a snake. I always wanted to, but never.
I've tried
Tastes like
snake.
spotted owl.
How have you not?
I killed one out in West Texas one time. That one's actually hanging on my wall. Well, if I had stuff up on the walls, it'd be hanging on the wall at the church office. Yeah, I don't know. What did it taste like, Melody? Jeff says spotted owl.
Let's go with that. I don't know. It was mostly like bones. Yeah. There's not a lot of meat in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's probably more of a novelty.
Yeah.
Thing. Yeah. So again, in our world, our culture is so flat. The expectation is, again, equality, at least in terms of status or worth. But in most other places in the world, there's some kind of hierarchy where our leaders are kind of nobility of some kind. And then there's kind of this graded process going down to, wherever we all fit on the totem pole. And so in our world, we value things like youth. We all wish that we were, 10 years younger or 20 years younger or whatever. But in most other parts of the world, they actually value age because of the wisdom and the experience and the knowledge that comes with a longer life. And so this doesn't sound like much of an insult or much of a problem. Oh, your child's a king. I mean, your king is a child. But this is actually a really bad thing that he's saying. Woe to you when your king is a child, or if you want to take the alternate translation, is a slave. So basically he's saying your king is like a slave or is like a child. He's someone of very low status. And this is problematic. When we were in Egypt, their world is split into very hard lines across male, female. So men have particular roles, women have the opposite roles. And when a boy is born into a home, the mother, her honor is elevated inside the family. And so she is treated with more respect because of the boy child. And he is treated like a king because he's a little baby boy in a world of women. And so they don't want him to cry or want for anything. And so the moment he opens his mouth, there's, mother, sister, aunts, grandmothers that are, just immediately putting stuff in the baby's mouth. And so he's treated like a prince. Well, at a certain point, he's brought into the man's world. And the man's side of the world in the Arab world is a hierarchy that's based on age and status. And so now he's in the family and he's the youngest. Now he's in the man's side of the family. He's the youngest person. Maybe he's 5, 6, 7, something like this. So before, if the men wanted tea, they would make one of the women do it. Well, if they're not around and now there's just this boy, it falls to the youngest or least status person to go and make the tea and bring it for everybody. So he goes through massive culture shock overnight because he went from, I am king of this palace and everyone does my bidding, I lack for nothing, to every man in the world is shouting at me, telling me what to do, and I have to, be their humble servant until someone is born under me. So their understandings of age and status are very different than our own. And this is why he's saying this is such a big insult. Your king is a child or someone of low status. And one of his metrics for understanding, do you have a foolish king, is their eating schedule. I think this is more metaphorical than anything, but he says your princes feast in the morning. There's a flip side where he says, happy are you, O land, when your king is the son of nobility. So that's one side of the coin. Here's the other side of the coin. Your son is the son of nobility. Okay, so he has the right status, the right family, so to speak. And your princes feed at the proper time for strength and not for drunkenness. And so with the foolish boy king model, it's instant gratification, hand to mouth. Hey, I have the power. I'm just going to do it. Let's have a feast right here, right now. And in the mirrored verse, he brings in the word drunkenness. So in these feasts, the king is getting drunk in the morning time. It's not a sign of celebration. It's actually this huge sign of hubris and pride. And the flip side is this other thing. He says, the wise king, the son of nobility, feasts at the proper time and for the proper reasons, for strength, not for drunkenness. There's a parallel verse to this in Proverbs. In Proverbs 29:2, he says, when the righteous increase, the people rejoice, but when the wicked rule, the people groan. I don't care what your political party is or what your voting practices are. I'm personally a political atheist, mostly because deep down I'm a libertarian and I know we'll never have anybody win. So it's easier to just deal with my own feelings if I'm a political atheist. But whatever your affiliation is, you probably at some point, hopefully many points, are disappointed with your leaders. If you're paying attention, you should be disappointed. I don't care who your people are, you should probably be disappointed at some point with them, because partly just because they're human, but partly once you get to that level of politics, the national level, it's a whole different game. But Solomon is saying, well, when the righteous increase, the people rejoice. When the wicked lead, they groan. And so oftentimes we see that sometimes God's judgment on us is giving us what we want. We saw that with Israel wanting a king. God had this system where his relationship with them would be mediated through the priesthood and in a much more direct line, that they wouldn't be like the other nations, which had a king who had to be kind of fattened up and satiated on a perpetual basis. And they said, no, give us a king. And so he says, all right, here's your king. And some of those worked out okay. Most did not. Most ended quite badly. Most led them in the things that they were brought in to conquer the nations before them. They followed in their ways instead of in the ways of God. And so he, who our rulers are, who our leaders are, their character matters. Verse 18, he continues this line of thought. He says, through sloth, the roof sinks in, and through indolence, the house leaks. Again, I see this very much in line with some of what he's said in Proverbs. Go to the ant, you sluggard, consider his ways and be wise. There are some people who believe that this book is written at a much later time period, not written by Solomon at all. And I guess they might say, well, they're throwing these verses in trying to show the similarity. And I would respond and just say, or it's actually written by Solomon and he's in some way consistent with himself, as humans, tend to be. But I think this is certainly an example where it goes back to that. It goes back to some of his earlier writings. Verse 19, bread is made for laughter and wine, gladness. Wine gladdens life, and money answers everything. I feel like there's an American way of thinking about that goes, yeah, that's my verse. You should stitch that on a pillow and give it to a graduate. Money answers everything. And then when people cry foul, you just say, no, it's Ecclesiastes right here. Yeah, every now and then there's a verse in the Bible where you go, huh? Why is that in there? I've what's that?
Do you think that he's just saying there that not that money is the answer as much as it is an answer in every situation, because it can be converted into whatever it is you need. You can make that money into a meal. You can make that money into a house or into whatever.
And I think to some degree he would attach monetary value to wisdom. Wisdom should lead you to some kind of wise output, and money is certainly a metric for that. Well, when I've talked a lot in this course, and then if you had me in other Bible studies or classes, I've talked a lot about honor and shame, and it's kind of a passionate study of mine. It comes out of my time in the Middle East, but then I see it all through the Bible, because the Bible is largely a product of the Middle East, and it's honor and shame is such a funny thing, because on the surface it sounds so noble, the ways in which it interacts, and then when you ask people who are in an honor shame culture, well, how do you get honor? Oftentimes, at least in the Middle Eastern context, the first answer they'll say is money. And you think, wait a second, because again, for us, money is just kind of like the cheap go-to option to fix anything. We throw money at it and it goes away. But their understanding is much more like you were saying, Jeff, where it's, if I have money, I can show hospitality. Hospitality brings my family honor. If I have money, I can be generous with the poor. Generosity of the poor brings my family honor. If I have money, we can feed the hungry. So there's all of these kind of downstream examples. In fact, Jesus, when he's talking with the rich young ruler, and he says, go sell everything you have and give to the poor, in our American dollars and cents way, we're thinking, oh, this is just, God doesn't like riches. God doesn't want me to have riches. God doesn't like money. And none of it had to do anything with that. Very clearly, you can see in that story that this man is kind of has a self-inflated view. He's very into what he can do and what he can produce. And so again, if you understand that money brings honor and brings all of these other things, then you realize to get rid of money, Jesus is really telling him, get rid of that thing which brings you honor and take up what you view to be this life of shame and come follow me. And that's where the rich young ruler said, yeah, can't do that. I think it had less to do with the money and more to do with what does money do for him.
I think also that the money for him was a way of showing his favor with God, right? He could spend time studying Torah. He could be engaged in almsgiving and right. Those sort of things that demonstrate that you are an observant Jew and enjoy the favor of God. And Jesus just says, yeah, give all that up. Trust me for that.
Right. And in the world where people who are impoverished are sinners, the opposite of that is, well, people who are rich must be living righteously. Yeah, they must be saints. And so, well, I want to be a saint, and therefore I must strive to be rich. That's a necessity. So the closing verses, he says, even in your thoughts, do not curse the king, nor in your bedroom curse the rich, for a bird of the air will carry your voice, or some winged creature tell the matter. It's amazing to me how relevant the Bible always is. How many politicians, comedians, celebrities right now are having their world turned upside down because of something they tweeted, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years ago. A lot. People are taking stuff down, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying it is. We say these things, what we think are in private, or we send an email to someone, would be the modern day equivalent of this, and then that gets forwarded on. Someone gave me the advice one time. It says, never put anything in an email that you wouldn't want forwarded, because that's what people do with emails, is they forward the email to someone else. Hey, do you see what Bear wrote? They send it off. And so, now it's public information. So he's very cautious about this. And again, this goes back to a previous chapter where he says, hey, don't try to hear. So he's talking about your status going upward. Don't say stuff about the rich, or don't say stuff about the king. But he's also talked about it in reverse. Don't try to hear every word of your servant, because you're eventually going to hear them curse you. And also, haven't you cursed your master at some point? And obviously the answer is like, well, once or twice. All right, and that brings us to the end of chapter 10.